Thanks for tuning in to lesson 11 of the Bible Made Simple. It's hard to believe, but this is it. This is our final lesson. So I'm excited about it. I love this group of books that we'll be talking about. They are some of my favorites, but I could probably say that about all the others too. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, so thanks for being here. Tonight we're going to dive into the writings. And we'll talk about what that means exactly here in a few minutes. So on the first page of your handout there, these are actually the questions from the second lesson that we did. And I wanted to bring them back here because one of our goals for this series has been not only that we would learn tools to help us understand and apply the Bible, but that ultimately we would learn to love the Bible. And I think these questions really get at the heart of that. Is our love for Scripture growing, hopefully right along with our ability to understand and apply it. So think on these questions. You've already answered them back in lesson 2, so think about them now. Would you answer them differently? Have your practices of reading Scripture changed any through the course of this series? So think on that, and then we'll dive into the writings. Now, I explained last week kind of the reason why we're approaching the Old Testament this way in these 3 different sections of law, prophets, and writings. The writings traditionally in the Hebrew Bible or in the Jewish Old Testament, these would have come at the very end of the Old Testament. So they include the books that we normally call the wisdom books. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Those books are in the writings, but also books like Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Lamentations. All these books make up this collection called the writings. And one more note about why I think it's important that we study the Old Testament in this three-part division is that in the writings, the very last book of the Old Testament is 2nd Chronicles, which is surprising to us. The first time I heard that, I was like, whoa, this is totally new and crazy. Why does that come at the end? And I think it's because if we read through 1st and 2nd Chronicles, the books are very hopeful about what the Lord is doing for the people of Israel. And even at the very end, the final chapter of the Old Testament in this kind of traditional structure, 2nd Chronicles 36, it ends talking about how the people are coming back from the exile, that God has, in His providence, brought the people back to the promised land from the exile, and He is working out His plan among the people. So if we end the Old Testament on that note, the Jewish mind, so to speak, is ready for what comes next in God's plan for His people. And of course, we know that was Jesus Christ, that the plan that God was working among His people was ultimately to bring the Messiah, Jesus Christ, into the world. So that's just another reason why I think it's really great to study kind of in this 3-part structure. But so we've talked about that. That final blank there in that first paragraph is that God has brought His people back from the exile into the promised land once again. So now I mentioned this at the beginning that many of the writings are what we would call the wisdom books. If you kind of flip right open to the middle of the Bible, all those books kind of there together, from Job to Song of Songs. Those are what we call the wisdom books. And these are different than the laws, the stories, or the prophecies that we've encountered in the Old Testament so far. In the law and the prophets, the message usually had to do with what the people of Israel should believe and how they should obey God. Well, when we get to the wisdom books are more directed towards how the people of God should think, and they target the emotions, not so much our intellect or our ability to reason and follow an argument. So that's what kind of separates the wisdom books out, is that they talk about how we should think and they address our emotions. So those are just two factors, and that's not to say that we don't find those things in other parts of the Old Testament, but they're one of the things that make the wisdom books unique, I think. So the wisdom books tell people how to think and appeal to their emotions. This has been really helpful for me in thinking through the wisdom books, is that in Proverbs we get kind of a basic outline for life. We get truths that are generally true about life. So if we open up to Proverbs, we're reading things and we think to ourselves, this makes sense. This is about how life should go. Well, when we get to Job, another one of the wisdom books, Job tackles some of the hard questions in life. What happens when what we expect based on Proverbs doesn't happen? What happens when the righteous person does not receive blessing or is not rewarded for their righteousness? In Job's case, what happens when the righteous person loses everything? So Job and Proverbs, I think when we read them together like that, and then when we add Ecclesiastes to the mix, that Ecclesiastes is written to search for the meaning in life, and how the author finds that meaning in life. So I think we're meant to take all these wisdom books and read them together. We need them all and the different perspectives that they give for us to have a whole and balanced view of life. And then Song of Solomon, another one of the wisdom books, celebrates the intimacy that a husband and wife share in marriage. And then in the Psalms, we have this great collection of hymns and prayers to God that we can even just begin voicing in our own lives right now. So really the wisdom section of the writings is really a great section for us to read and to consider. So in the box there on page 2, I talk a little bit about poetry in the writings. When we think about poetry, we think about rhythm and rhyme, the two things that kind of set apart English poetry. Well, in Hebrew, they didn't care so much about rhyming words or about rhythm. Instead, they had different ways of writing poetry. So a few of the three main techniques that they use in writing poetry is first of all, they use fewer words. If a Hebrew poet is writing a poem, he's going to carefully choose the words that he writes down, and he's going to put them together. Even if he has to leave out some words, he's going to put in the most important words that convey his meaning really bluntly. So I've got an example for you there in Psalm 24. Make your ways known to me, Lord. Teach me your paths. So very blunt, very straightforward and to the point. The second one, and this is maybe the most common one, is that a Hebrew poet wrote 2 lines, put them side by side, and those 2 lines convey the same idea. Even in that last example that we saw, make your ways known to me, Lord, teach me your paths. Those things really are saying the same thing, just in a little bit of a different way. And we find that all over, probably in every psalm, in every piece of poetry that we're reading in the Old Testament. I think we find this going on, where 2 lines of poetry are written side by side to express the same idea. The example here is from Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Again, they're saying the same thing, just in slightly different ways. But it fills out kind of the picture that we have in our minds of what the psalmist is saying. And then finally, Hebrew poets wrote in figures of speech. This is all over the place. The example here, the ropes of death were wrapped around me, the torrents of destruction terrified me. So we automatically, we visualize this type of language. When we hear a figure of speech, we know that it's not meant always to be taken literally. Like I've said so many times, I'm going to run to the store real quick. And what I mean by that is not that I'm going to throw on my sneakers and my sweatband and run to the store. What I mean is I'm going to hop in my car and drive to the store. But in the English that we speak every day, that's become an acceptable way to say, I'm going to go on an errand real quick, is to say, I'm just going to run to the store. Well, the psalmists do the same thing. So, ropes of death. We know that death doesn't have actual ropes, but the psalmist is using this type of language intentionally so that we visualize and feel what he's feeling. There's another passage, I can't remember exactly where it comes from, but the psalmist will say that the Lord hides him under the shadow of his wings. Well, we know that the psalmist is not thinking that God really has wings, but he's using this language to communicate an idea or an image. He wants us to imagine maybe the type of safety or security that baby chicks would have under the mother hen, that is the kind of closeness, the kind of safety that we can feel when God comes to our rescue. So all over the place then, we find these figures of speech, words and phrases that are meant to give us a picture in our minds or a feeling in our gut of what the psalmist is going through. So that's the type of thing that a figure of speech does in the Psalms. So when we ask our three questions in the writings, what does it say, what did it mean, what does it mean, this is pretty straightforward. I didn't have much to say about this. When we ask what does it say, this is maybe the most important step in the writings, especially in the wisdom literature. We need to take time to read carefully. We need to read slowly. So there's a list, I think, in lesson 2, a list of details that we can look for when we're reading carefully. Go back to that list. Look for repeated words or phrases. Look for the different figures of speech that the author is using. Look for the way that the two lines go together to make that single point, that single idea. So these are all things that we can pay attention to, and the closer that we read, the more carefully that we read on this first step, I think the more we'll benefit from as we think about it. And I think that's a key, I think, to the wisdom literature, maybe to all of the writings, is that they're meant to be read carefully and then thought about. So maybe the best approach then, when we come to the writings, when we come to the Psalms or to the other parts of the wisdom literature, maybe we read it carefully and then we just go sit on the back porch for a while. Maybe with our Bibles still open, sipping a cup of coffee or a glass of tea, and we just think about what we've read. And I think that is maybe the most beneficial way for us to approach this section of Scripture, is to read it carefully and then just go on a walk and think and talk to God and let the message be impressed on our hearts. So maybe consider that as you're working through this exercise. When we ask the question, what did it mean? This is where we'll try to visualize the picture that the author is painting. How are these figures of speech? How is the author using those to paint a picture? What does that picture look like? What is the emotion that the author's feeling? Try to step into that world. Try to step into the author's emotions, into this picture that he's painting. And then also we can pay attention to the order of the verses. Does the author's tone change from the beginning to the end of a psalm, for example? And then when we ask the question, what does it mean for us today? This is where we find the main point of the passage, and then we make applications in our lives from the main point. Well, generally, I think the wisdom books are fairly easy to find the main point in. Remember that because the wisdom books target our emotions, because they address the way we think, your main point might have to do with one of those two things. Your main point might have to do with emotions or with the way we need to think about God or the world around us. So chances are your main point could have to do with one of those things. And then if we are in one of the stories, if we're in 1st or 2nd Chronicles, if we're in Esther or Ezra and Nehemiah, the main point could be connected to the actual characters in those stories, Or, and I think this is often the case in the writings, is that the main point is connected to how God is working behind the scenes to bring about His plan. So I hope these things are helpful for you as you're reading through this really important section of Scripture. For our passage this week, it's Psalm 19, the whole thing. It's only 14 verses, and this is a fantastic psalm. So dive in, use the 3 steps of the interpretive journey on this psalm, and then we can gather on Wednesday and discuss it together. So again, thank you so much for joining us on this series. It's been a blast for me to work through from my end, so I hope it's been always helpful for you, and truly I hope it's been helpful no matter what stage you're in your experience reading the Bible. If you're brand new or if you've been reading the Bible for years and years, I hope that you've learned and that we've learned together things that can help us become even better readers of Scripture. And at the end of the day, I hope that we love Scripture more even than when we started. So thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time.